Welcome, everyone, to the World Famous Adventures Club of Los Angeles. My name's Rich Mayfield, member 1211. I'm here tonight with Gavin McClurg. I would say, in one word, paragliding extraordinaire.
That's 2 words.
That's 2. Okay, you got me already. This is going to be a tough interview. So, if people have looked at your channels and all your media out there, they see you paragliding in the most beautiful places on the planet. Right, we've seen some imagery of you up above the Alps, up above these gorgeous vistas that sometimes we see from the air, right? But you're in it in a different way. We see it from an airplane or something maybe, and you're out there in situ, so to speak, which is so cool. And I'm glad you're here. So I want to start with, how did you get started paragliding?
Well, don't all good stories start with a girl, right?
Yeah?
Mine did. I was sailing around the world, and I came home to surprise the boat was down in New Zealand that year, and I'd been gone for quite a few years at that point. And I came back to surprise my mom for her 60th birthday in Seattle, and was cooking for a friend of mine who was throwing a big 50th party for himself, and met her, and we got along pretty well, and I talked her into coming down to New Zealand and doing some sailing with me, and I was heading up to the South Pacific that year to do some charters, and she was a pilot, and she had gear, and I had a friend that had been begging me to get into paragliding for 10 years back in Seattle. He lived at the base of this place called Tiger Mountain. It's a common place to learn, and it always looked quite boring because I would just see them kind of fly around and then land on the ground. I didn't know that you could use them to travel. And then B, I just kept hearing about people getting really hurt and killed, and it's aviation. And so, and I never heard it was gear or stuff. It was just people making bad decisions. And I was really good at making bad decisions. So I thought it wouldn't be a very good thing for me to just get into. But she was great, and I liked her a lot, and she was a pilot, and so I was basically showing off to get into it.
She said, do this, and you're like, of course I can do that.
Of course,
Let's
yes,
go.
I'd love
Let's
to
do
do
it.
that. I've done that with riding horses, too. I'm terrified of horses, but, there's a girl that wants to ride a horse. So, so she got me into it, and she wasn't really a pilot either. I didn't realize that until later, but she was pretty new at all of it. She was self-taught, which is not traditional.
Let's what year is this, just so we have a time frame?
This was 2003.
2003.
Fall 2003. And so she took me out off these little tiny hills in northern New Zealand, little farmers' hills, and she kind of taught me how to ground handle. And the first time I did that, it didn't go that well. I got towed through a bunch of cow shit and got hung up on a fence. But eventually we got through the ground handling, and then she launched me off a couple of really tiny little hills, and I thought it was neat. But it didn't really. I was more into the boat thing and sailing, and it was, again, just to impress her. But a couple years later, I got more into it. That's another story. But eventually got licensed and went through a proper school, and like you learn with gliding, you learn how to launch and land, and eventually, I learned that you could travel with the paraglider, and then I got pretty hooked.
So this is like what we commonly see with paragliders. We see them. Where is this right here?
This is off the coast of São Miguel in the Azores. So, like I said, we were doing the boat thing, and we were traveling around the world, and then the business was based around kitesurfing and surfing, but then I learned how to paraglide, and this is out in French Polynesia, this one, but kind of hard to learn how to fly when you're sailing around the world because there's not much terrain. You're on these little islands. And so wherever we could, we would fly. We ended up getting a tow winch so we could pull up behind the dinghy and get up to 2,000 or 3,000 feet and then cut loose and then fly down. But it took, when I got done with sailing in 2011, so this was a decade later, then I was able to focus more on it and start really flying and training, and started competing and getting.
And where'd you do all that training?
Mostly in the Alps, actually. I did quite a bit of training in Turkey, and then we spent a couple really full summers in the Alps, and it was there that I became aware of this race called the Red Bull X Alps.
Okay.
And the first time I saw it, actually this was earlier than that, but the first time I saw it was in 2007, and it's all live, and you can watch it online. And I literally couldn't, the first time I saw it, I couldn't understand what they were doing. Wait, they're traveling by paraglider or foot across the entire length of the Alps. They're crossing 6 or 7 countries in 12 days, and they're flying sometimes on a really good day 200 kilometers or 250 kilometers in a day. And they call it the hardest adventure race on earth, so it's kind of the Iditarod of paragliding. So super high risk, very, very endurance level stuff. You're climbing the height of Everest in 12 days 4 to 5 times. So it's a really physical race with this crazy element of flying. And you carry everything on your back. You carry your wing and your harness and your instruments. And so when I saw that in 2007, I thought, I really want to do that.
Want to get into that
But
race?
how do they do that? I couldn't understand it. So it took quite a few years. My first race was in 2015.
So basically, you're trying to fly the whole course.
Yes.
But if you
try to
can't
fly
fly-
as much as you can, because it's a lot better than walking.
So then these guys are running? Like,
Yeah,
or, you know, they're
you're
trying to book
jogging.
it.
You're allowed to move between 5:30 in the morning and 10:30 at night, and then one night in the race you can go all night. You pull what's called a night pass, and it's vicious. The whoever's in last every 48 hours. This is a Red Bull event, right? So whoever's last every 48 hours gets eliminated. Blisters always take out several people. Nobody's ever died in the race, incredibly, but people get pretty wrecked. There's been a lot of helicopter rescues and bad stuff, but. Luckily, I was able to keep going on all of them, but the only one I made was my first one to the end. I think it's got an 11% finish rate.
Wow.
So not many people get there. But in my first one, I did. I made it to Monaco. Now the race is different. It's a different course, but it's happening this June. It happens every 2 years, and it's vicious.
And do you have some pictures of you flying? This was your first introduction to, what do you call it? It's cross-country paragliding.
Paragliding, yeah.
Right.
There's a few different forms of paragliding. There's speed flying, there's acrobatics, and I do them as well, but my specialty is cross-country, is distance flying. So trying to go as far as you can in a day. Or, in the case of vol biv, which is French, they do all the cool stuff, right, is vol, fly, biv, camp. So in the case of some of the things we're going to show you tonight is multi-day expeditions.
So I'd like to talk about how you go about planning one of these multi-day expeditions. One of the I guess, key documentaries that you put together is 500 Miles to Nowhere.
Yeah, this was kind of what set it all off. So I had done a little bit of bivvy, short full biv, we call it bivvy, in the Himalayas in India. And then we did a big project in 2013 across the Sierras. So from the south end of the Sierras up to the Oregon border, and it took 18 days. And that was all vol biv. And then the next year we thought, okay, what can we do that's a really cool line? We're always looking for neat lines. And we decided to start in Hurricane, which is kind of the entrance to Zion National Park. It's out in front, and go to Jackson Hole. And so it was 500 miles, and we thought we could do it in maybe 10 days or 2 weeks if the weather was good. And the reason I'm giving this away, but the reason the movie is named 500 Miles to Nowhere is we got nowhere. We launched, I think the longest flight on that whole trip was maybe 20K, which is nothing. That's a half an hour.
That's 20K towards your destination.
Toward the destination. The weather was terrible. The monsoon was really strong that year, and it was blowing up way up into Utah. And it was just super dangerous to fly every day. It was too windy, it was too monsoonal, too much moisture, too many cumulonimbus clouds, which are scary for us because they can suck you way too high. And so we got nowhere, but we made a really cool film. And we got lots of great footage. This is a picture that's Hurricane Ridge there. And we premiered it at Banff Mountain Film Festival, and it did really well. And there just happened to be, as there is in these kind of things, there was somebody in the audience who became really instrumental in future projects. His name's Brian Smith. He runs a company called Real Water Productions, and they had done a lot of stuff with Red Bull Media House. And so he came up to me after the movie and said, hey, we're constantly looking for ideas. We want to pitch something to Red Bull, but it's Red Bull, so it has to be longer, harder, scarier, more dangerous than anything that's ever been done in this sport. Do you have any ideas? And I said, I've got a lot of ideas. I've got a ton of ideas that fit that bill. And one of them was crossing the Canadian Rockies down to the U.S. border, which had never been done. It's never been done since. And that turned into the Rockies Traverse. So I don't know if you want to show.
Yeah, let's
that
show
stuff,
it.
But should we show 500 Miles to Nowhere?
Yeah, let's
maybe?
let's take a minute.
This is
to
just a
look at
little
500.
snippet from the movie that we premiered at Banff. This was back 2014, I think. But it's quite pretty.
I think what's really exciting about where we are with this sport, in most other activities, everything's kind of been done. In what we're doing, we've barely touched the surface.
And it stills my mind. It's an amazing experience that is unknowable unless you live it.
Flying for me is an escape. Anytime my feet leave the ground, it almost becomes meditation.
It's just you and the elements. You're trying to realize your own potential in a place where no one sees and no one cares. There's a purity in that.
Got a little saying that you've got to be dumb enough to want to do this and smart enough to get it back to the ground safely.
Magic. How does a paraglider work? A paraglider works by magic. That's what I'm convinced of. I think it's all magic. It cannot you look at that thing and it can't possibly work. We use thermals to climb and to gain altitude. And that's like putting gas in the tank of a car. We need altitude to achieve distance. We climb way up into the sky as high as we can on a given day, and then we use that altitude to glide somewhere and look for another thermal. If we get another thermal, we get to put some more gas in the tank.
What excites me about bivy flying is the commitment to the unknown. Normally when you go do a sport, you go do your activity and you end up back at your car. You know the outcome. Whereas in bivy flying, you have no idea what's gonna happen each day. You have no idea where you're gonna end up, and it could be weeks before you even get there.
Full bivouac literally means fly camp, and that's what we're doing. We're packing everything we need to survive for multiple days, and the way we travel is in the air. We launch, we fly, we land high, we camp, and then we do the same thing the next day, and we just carry on as long as the weather allows.
We are able to fly them 200 miles, 20,000 feet above the ground. Everything else we do, the arc is below us on skis or a mountain bike or in a car or motorcycle, and here the arc is above us. You've got a dynamic wing, you've got a dynamic set of lines, and this air mass that you can't see, and it's really magnificent when you bury your brake and you're winding up at an extreme rate of speed.
Nice! Get it! You got it! Oh yeah!
I didn't know people could do that on aircraft that don't have engines, that they could use them to get off a mountain and land somewhere else, and then I got really interested in it.
A lot of this hasn't been done before, and to be there to do it and to figure it out is a very special time.
Our first turn point is about 65 miles away at Mount Etna. Might be a reasonable place to top land. I think the number of people flying vol biv in the world is probably close to 50. Maybe it's a little bit more adventure than most people want to bite off.
It's not the longest line, it's not the records really, It's trying to find an aesthetic line to fly that is personally inspiring.
There is risk. I think we have to take risk in life. You know, it's if we don't take risk, what's the point of it? That's how you get the reward out of it. It's big and it's dangerous, but it's exciting and it's beautiful and it's fun. And what else are you going to do with yourself?
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
I mean, when I first saw that, I'm like, well, that's awesome, because I love to hike and I love to be outdoors. I'm like, and you get to fly?
Yeah. It's a nice way to connect the dots.
It really is.
It's like we made it look very calm there. You know, when you're in a jet and you're taking off from Denver, you've all been there probably. It's you know, it's really, really rough and people are sometimes screaming. That's what we're seeking. That's the air that we want,
right?
You know, because it's moving. We want air that's moving around. So it's not always that gentle and calm, but yeah, that was a lot of fun, and that set off a chain of events in my world that was really exciting.
And that's what you're after. You're after that kind of experience out there.
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
And like I said, I don't know that many. They said it in the film there. My buddy Nick said it in the film. It's really cool not knowing where you're going to end up. And that pretty much every time we step off the hill, we don't know where we're going.
So what does your planning
look
like?
We have an idea. We're trying to
you know,
get
I heard him
somewhere,
say like, oh, our next turn point's like 60 miles away or whatever. So what does your planning look like? Like
I mean, it's all based on the weather. But even now that modeling has gotten so good, it's still kind of a roll of the dice. And so there are days that just look perfect and banger, and we think we're going to fly 300K and you go 10. And then there's the opposite of it. So part of it is you just have to give it a shot. There's definitely days that, you know, when there's not much wind, we don't handle very much wind. We don't have an engine. Our trim speed's 40K an hour. You know, it's a pretty slow, dumb aircraft with high potential for not ending very well. So, you know, we're very at the whim of the weather. And so if we've got overdevelopment or too much wind or too much shade or not enough lift, not enough instability in the atmosphere, but you don't want too much because then it's going to overdevelop. So you need all these things to just kind of line up. And so you might have an idea that, oh, maybe the day is we could fly 200K, and like the day I broke the record, I thought I was going to go 50 that day, and I went 240 miles. And so, you know, it was a 16-hour drive back, and it took me 7.5 hours to get there on a paraglider. So, you know, you can have some nice surprises.
That's crazy. Wow. Well, I think everybody's inspired by that, right?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Like, that is the way to go, right?
Yes.
Like, this is the way. Like, if you want to experience, because I think a lot about, like, what's the right way to experience nature? How fast do you go?
Yeah.
Walking might be a little bit slow. I think we would all agree that the high-speed car is too fast,
yes.
or a jet's too fast. You can't see anything in a jet,
yeah.
Right? So maybe a bicycle, you know, maybe a motorcycle, somewhere in there. But this,
where you can smell the roses. For
yeah,
sure.
this seems to be a unique way to experience the outdoors that is at the right speed, so to speak.
Yeah, it's very 3D. It's very the best. I spend a lot of time kayaking and spend a lot of time on rivers, and that's to me the kind of the closest thing is that, you know, when the river changes, when the season changes, when the cold or warm changes, every river, you know, if you've done the same river, the Grand Canyon 10 times, it's 10 totally different trips. It's never the same. And you can't stop. You know, when you're in a rapid or in a waterfall or something really high risk, you can't just be halfway down and go, I'm out. I don't want to keep doing this. This is way too scary. Flying is the same way. You've got to get that thing down to the ground. And when you're 10,000 feet above the ground, it takes a while to get down there. And so it's kind of the ultimate unknown.
So what do you do, like in this picture?
It's such a cool way to experience the world, because every flight, you know, if I did this Rockies trip again, which I don't think I would ever do, hopefully smarter than that, but you know, it wouldn't be the same because the weather is totally different and the conditions are totally different. So that 500 miles to nowhere, what was neat about that, it set up this one, which we'll show a little clip of that in a bit here too. But so this guy Brian Smith came to me and said, hey, you know, you got any ideas? And we landed on the Canadian Rockies crossing down to the U.S. border. And in talking to him, they had just done a film with Will Gadd, one of the Red Bull OGs, probably the most famous ice climber in the world, very accomplished pilot, had a number of world records in his career, still flies all the time now, and just an amazing athlete, amazing everything. And he was a hero, but I'd never met him. And these guys had just done a film with him on Helmkin Falls the winter before for Red Bull, and he's a Red Bull athlete. And they said, oh, well, that's in his backyard. Do you want to do this with Will Gadd? Should we talk to him? And I said, well, of course I want to do this with Will Gadd, but he doesn't know me from, I don't. And so I called him up on the phone and said, hey, I've got this great idea. We'll start in McBride and we'll fly all the way down the Canadian Rockies and we'll go all the way to Jackson Hole. It's longer and scarier and it fits all the bill for Red Bull. And he said, yeah, but there's sections of that we'd have to walk. We can't fly that the whole way. And I said, yeah, it'll look gnarly and burly and we'll be walking. I hate walking. I don't want to walk. I'll walk up a mountain, but I'm going to fly. If we do this, I want to fly the whole thing. We have to connect it. So it'd be like through hiking, you know, where you start the next day where you've ended the day before. So it has to be a continuous track log when we finish. Took 18 days, but we flew the whole thing. I mean, we would bomb out. We wouldn't, you know, we'd have to hike back up the next morning and kind of backtrack in the air and keep going. But I think to this day, it's the longest connected series of flights in paragliding. Took 18 days, completely wild. And I'm going to show you a clip from the very first day. I'd known Will Gadd at this point for about 6 hours. I'd gotten there super late the night before, spent the night with him, met his daughters. We drove by past Robeson. He lives in Canmore. We're driving north, and we drive past Mount Robson in the Canadian Rockies, the highest mountain in the Canadian Rockies, and he had climbed it, and it's infamous. If you're a climber, you have to climb Mount Robson. And he was telling me all about how gnarly it is and the north face, and you never get to see it. And when we drove by, we could see it this next morning. So I'm just in awe. I'm with Will Gadd. I'm in awe. I'm getting to do this big expedition with Cineflex cameras and a helicopter and the whole thing. And we're walking up to our first launch. And on the way up, about halfway up, he's already got me pegged. He said, "You're an optimist." Yeah, I'm an optimist. He goes, "I hate optimists." Why? Is it because optimists are going to get me killed and you're going to die, and I don't want to die on this trip? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you know how you're always the glass is half full kind of guy? I'm the guy that's looking for the rock that's going to break the fucking glass. Yeah. And that's his approach to risk. And that's why he's still doing it to this day. And he just said, you've got to straighten everything out. I don't want to do this with you if you're optimistic. I want us to be looking at what's going to kill us and not get killed. So don't do anything fancy for the cameras. Da, da, da. So by the time we got up to the launch, I was freaked. I was totally scared. Oh my gosh, I don't pass the test. And so our line is directly south, and we get in the air and we start thermaling, and it's a beautiful day. And the film crew's not there yet. We've launched. I mean, the ground crew is, but the helicopter's en route. And so I'm setting this shot up. And we're 20K into the flight, and everything's perfect. And he said, we have to go fly over Mount Robson. But you just said the optimism thing. That's way off course, and that's way east. And how are we going to get back to the line? And I was really nervous about this. He said, no, it's got to be done. Nobody's ever flown over this mountain. We have to do this. I said, okay, Will. So let's show that clip.
No, before we show it, I want to talk about this because you use this term bomb out, right?
Yeah.
So I imagine, I can kind of think what that is, but like if you're up here in this picture and you have to bail Or is that, what do you do? Like, what's the out?
Yeah, you can see there's not a lot of places to land.
Not a lot of places I would want to hike out of.
Right. So when you learn how to paraglide, you're a glider pilot. When you learn aviation, you never fly into an area where there isn't an out. You always have an exit. You've always got a place to land. And I don't think that's in this clip, but on this Rockies Traverse, one of the things we learned really quickly is that we would be flying over vast areas with no place to land. It's the Rocky Mountains. It's just treed for sometimes 100K where there wouldn't be a place to land. So we had to completely switch the algorithm and our approach, and it was at times incredibly dicey because we don't have the glide to make it to the next. So you're always having to get the next thermal. It was pretty high stress environment.
And if you don't find a place to land,
you're landing in the trees, or you're landing in the rocks, or you're landing in a lake, all bad options.
what's your preferred? Trees, rocks, land,
trees tend to be pretty safe, actually, as long as you can get down. But trees, they say, there are those that have and those that will. And I had gone many years without landing in a tree, and I've now landed in 6. So eventually you're going to land in a tree, but they tend to be pretty safe. If there's a good canopy, you can just go in like a bear and just go straight into the tree, just focus on the tree and land in it.
And by safe, you mean not dead? Not
dead, yes. As long as something hangs you up, your wing or your reserve, and we have a parachute. If we've lost our wing because of, it's called a cascade, you have a big collapse that you can't recover, you have to throw your reserve, and I've done that as well. But usually trees are safe. The canopies that are bad are the ones that have nothing for the bottom 100 feet and a lot up top. And if you get through all that, then you go to the ground. But trees tend to be pretty safe. People land in trees. But I'll take that over rocks, or water's really bad.
Why is water so bad?
Water is, you have a wing that's got a bottom surface and a top surface that if it starts filling up with water and you can't get out of your stuff, you're tied to a very massive anchor and you're going down. And water landings tend to be not survivable, especially if there's any current. So ocean is really bad, especially in shore break. Rivers are terrible. Lakes can be okay if you're right next to the shoreline.
Because so many of these original pictures were over the ocean.
Yeah, and those were where we could fly out over the ocean and come back to a nice, safe way.
So basically, you're looking for the beach.
Looking for the beach, yeah, or a field or somewhere where you can put it in safely.
Do you want to cue up this next video? This is the Rockies one, right?
This is the Rockies one.
The meters flying straight toward Mount Robson. This is the dream flight. It just doesn't get any better than this at all. Like, light it up, we're on fire.
Every mountaineer wants to climb that peak. It's such a classic mountain. That's a once-in-a-lifetime event. Flying over Robson? You just don't get to do that.
I'll tell you something great about that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So that's an ideal land out.
That's an ideal. That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
That's what you're looking for.
I'll tell you, this is something that's hard to even imagine. But when we got into Mount Robson, and it was just firing. By firing, I mean the thermals. It was lift going up everywhere. The helicopter was just getting there from Vancouver, so it had just fueled up, so it's pretty heavy. It's an A-Star helicopter, so this is a jet helicopter. They're pretty powerful machines. And we get up to the top, and he's coming up, and he goes, "Can you come back down? I can't climb that fast." So we dial back down, and then we go to the top. "Can you come back down? I can't get up that fast." We did that we climbed up to the top of that thing 4 times. In a paraglider, no engine, just a shabby little fabric and really skinny lines, faster than an A-Star helicopter could get up there. We did it 4 times. It's amazing. I mean, we can accelerate faster than the fastest car on Earth going up in a strong thermal. It's
crazy.
pretty hard to imagine. We fly with a variometer and make sounds for going up and going down, but I mean it just ripping. It's going. And you're like you see birds going. We're doing the same thing. It's phenomenal. It's an amazing experience.
So when you have to come down, like when you're in that super strong lift, like what are the mechanics to come down?
First, go somewhere else because
Right.
thermals are only
Get out of the thermal,
Try to get out of the thermal and go somewhere else. The only time it's really dangerous is if you're in a big QNIM, a big cloud, because that's the base of a cloud is our top of lift, but that keeps going up into the cloud, and so the most famous paraglider to get caught in a big QNIM was a gal down at the Worlds in Australia in 2007. She went to 32,000 feet in a cloud. And a Korean pilot was next to her. They were competing, and they both went into this cloud stupidly, and he died from lightning strikes in the cloud.
They both pass out?
She passed out at 24,000 feet, went to 32,000 asleep, and her wing was completely encased in ice when she woke back up at 26,000 feet. So she was out all the way up. The cloud spit her out of the top, started plummeting down to the ground, encased in ice. You'll see that in the Alaska clip. And then woke up and landed perfectly safely. She was fine.
So do you guys carry oxygen when you're on these flights?
Yes, not there in Australia because they weren't supposed to go more than 8,000 feet. That was incredible weather and very bad decision making. But when I fly at home in Sun Valley or in the Rockies, we often get to our legal limit, which is 18,000 feet. So, and we fly with supplemental oxygen. So we fly with cannulas, and they act on breathing, and it's not nice to fly without oxygen when you're that high, for the cold, for the hypoxia. So it helps you think. We've all had pretty funny hypoxia stories at one point or another, but you tend to get a little dinged.
So are you able to collapse it and come back down, or do you just have to get out of the lift?
Really strong lift, you can full stall, which just balls up your wing, but in really strong lift, you'll keep going up. There's still too much wing, even though it's just a ball. And there's crazy stories of that. But our most effective way down is called a ground spiral. So you just tuck in really hard one way, a lot of brake, and you spiral really hard. It's kind of the opposite of going up, but you spiral really hard. But if you're in really strong lift, that gets pretty dizzying. It's not friendly to do.
Because you got to do that for a long time, right?
For a long time. But your kind of maximum descent is 20 meters a second. So 70 feet a second is a lot.
And what's the strongest lift you've experienced?
I was in a 24-meter climb in my first Red Bull X Alps, and it was terrifying.
Here we go.
Really, really, really scary. Yeah, it's not nice.
That's crazy.
Fast.
So where is this right here?
This is the Rockies. We should show the clip maybe from North of Known.
Yeah.
Want to see the Alaska one?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do North of Known.
It's also cold.
It has that
it's
bigness that you can't really describe or understand until you're here. I can't really put it into words. This place is just massive.
Gavin, do you copy? It's Dave. Gavin, you have a copy. I'm crossing Borka River.
So, just flew in this cloud for the last 20-some minutes. As you can see, it's pretty cold. Totally iced up. And, but now I'm just coming out of it. And I gotta keep my wing flying because as it starts to melt, it's gonna want to collapse.
So, normally when you're in these environments, you're working pretty hard. You got your core temperature up. Are you working pretty hard up there, or are you sitting in the hammock?
You're sitting in a hammock, yeah. I mean, your adrenaline's pumping pretty good in those kind of situations, but no, it can get really, really, really cold.
So you got to be prepped to sit.
Yes, and you're
you're
often
in the air.
launching
You're getting
lower earlier in the day where it's really warm, and so you're dressed up like the Michelin Man, and because you're anticipating going to altitude. But it can be pretty. I mean, even at home when it's almost 100 degrees at launch in Sun Valley on a really hot day in the summer, when you're up at 20,000 feet, it's
18,000 feet.
18,000 feet. Right.
Yeah.
Then you're it's way below freezing, and
Yeah.
that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that instability in the atmosphere, but it can be really cold.
That's crazy. Just to think about that being completely exposed. There is no more exposure than where you're at.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
no windbreak. You're looking for the.
And your hands are here.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of this, but then your hands aren't in your brakes, and so there's a lot of tricks that you learn over the years to stay warmer, but oxygen's a really good one. That helps a lot. But it can be. You're very exposed.
Right. So you put a video in here about kind of like the logistics of how paragliding works. So I want to play that one real quick.
Sure.
Because I think people are probably pretty interested in how you do this, right? Yeah.
That was that last shot there was the north side of Denali. That's what you're looking at there. That shot.
What was that video titled? The
North of Known.
No. The one that talks about how
paragliding works. Yeah, we did a bunch of little side films from this expedition. So this was 37 days across from one end of the Alaska range to the other end. So we went from west to east, and when we got past Denali, Red Bull cut us off. They've ended the funding. My partner, Dave Turner, had to go get married, so he left. It was taking a lot longer than we'd planned. So he left, the film crew left, and then I kept going. I completed it, but it was 37 days, and a lot of bushwhacking, a lot of walking.
Red Bull cut you off, huh?
Red Bull they do cut
That
you
doesn't
off.
sound like a Red Bull thing.
I know. No, they said.
Did
"This
you
is
argue
done.
with them?
This
You're
is
like,
a
this
great
is not
film.
Red Bull. Come on.
You've gotten past Denali. You've made it. We're just gonna. And I know that's not the end. I got to get to the end of the
Go
range,
further.
so,
Yeah.
Keep going.
I feel like you could saw it.
Yeah.
Phoebe, do we have that video of the? There we go.
This is the Alaska range. Yee!
Basically, a wing is like 2 bed sheets. It's got really narrow cells along what we call the leading edge. And we've just got to expose that to the wind, and the whole foil will fill with air. We can kind of like play with what we call our A lines, those are the lines that attach to the leading edge, and then bang, your wing inflates. Ideally, you've just got 5 to 15K of nice, gentle upslope breeze. That would be perfect. Just about anybody can launch in those kind of conditions.
One of the most difficult parts of paragliding is getting the wing off the ground, up into the air, and running off the slope. As we fly away from the hill, if the glider's not in a proper flying configuration, you can hit the mountain. When we're cross-country paragliding on a good weather day, the process is pretty simple, more or less, how the paraglider works. We find a rising current of air called a thermal. This warm rising thermal takes us as high as it goes, sometimes a few hundred feet, sometimes a few thousand feet. Our paragliders get about a 10-to-1 glide ratio. So if we can climb 5,000 feet up, then we'll travel 50,000 feet forward. As paraglider pilots, we are closely tied to the environment which we're traveling in. And one of the biggest indicators of how the day is going to turn out is the clouds. There's dozens of different types, and why they form and how they're forming tells us a lot. It paints a picture of what's going on to us. One of our biggest nemesis while paragliding is the wind. Our paragliders only really go about 30 miles an hour. And if you're pointed into a 45-mile-an-hour wind, like we found ourselves, then you're gonna land backwards.
Shit.
If you start getting up more than about 20 kilometers an hour wind in the mountains, it gets really rowdy and really dangerous.
Uh-oh. We got issues. Oh. I always refer to my paraglider setup as my magic backpack, because it truly is a bag full of magic. In this small, compact backpack is a full-blown aircraft capable of long-distance flights over 8 hours in duration. It blows my mind every time. It's nothing more than a glorified piece of nylon. It's basically a cut-up tent sewed together in a special way that generates lift. All of your camping gear, your food, your water, your supplies, it's all hanging from a few strands of spectra or aramid below a nylon wing.
That's great. So that was the Vario beeping in the background, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So tell me about this little cocoon that you're in. How do you get in that? Like, because I see you running. Yeah, the harness and.
Yeah, it's I almost have to demonstrate it, but so we can control the wing with two things: our hands with the brakes. I mean, our body shift and weight and all that. But we've also got a speed bar in here, and that accelerates your A lines, which is increasing your angle of attack. And so our feet are in what's called a pod harness, which it's kind of, it has an opening here that when we're flying there's magnets or a zipper that could close you up. But when you launch, your feet are outside of that, and it's basically just dangling behind you, and you have a foot plate down here for your feet to rest on once you're in. So and now my really light kit that I use in the Red Bull X House, my harness is 1.2 kilograms. It's very, very little, thin fabric, and there's not much to it.
Phoebe requested a break. She has some technical difficulties in streaming.
No, okay. We lose our stream? We're still recording?
Lost the stream.
Are we still recording though? No, we got copyright claim. Well, we're still recording locally though,
really?
right? Well, because we showed your movie, and now you're coming after us. That's how YouTube works.
Promise I'm
we
not.
get someone here, and it's like Gavin McClurg owns this copyright, and then I don't know. Do I click? I click. I'm talking to the guy right now. Does that count?
Right.
And do you get an email or something? How does this work? I don't know.
Right. That's amazing. YouTube's pretty savvy on that stuff, isn't it?
Let's just make sure that we're still recording at the bottom, and then we'll kind of deal with it later. Okay, we'll keep going. So I'd appreciate if YouTube emails you and says,
yes,
the Adventurers Club is stealing your stuff.
Right.
You say, well, I was there, it was okay.
I think we're okay. Red Bull paid for it all, so hopefully we're all right. But.
All right. Where were we? Okay, so you take off and all this stuff's hanging behind you, and then kind of like you kick your feet in and then you snap it.
Yeah, once you get going, you always want to fly away from the hill. Everything's under control. Don't do something stupid when you don't have any margin. But then once you're in, you can kind of grab that pod with a foot and swing it around, and then get both feet in and get settled. And because you're actually doing a lot with your feet when you're flying.
So let's talk about what your feet do and what your hands do. What do your hands do first of all?
Your hands are controlling the brakes, so they're slowing down. So you've got a leading edge and the tailing edge. Leading edge is here and the tail edge is behind. So when you're just hitting the brake, you're slowing down one or both sides of the glider. So to turn left, you just a little bit of brake on the left side and lean. And then to go faster, so when you're racing or basically anytime you're not gliding, anytime you're not climbing, you're trying to fly as fast as you can to the next thermal. So then you're using what's called your speed bar. And there's a whole art to that, how much you're using.
And that speed bar just changes your overall angle of attack?
It's just increasing your angle of attack. So it's tightening up your A lines, which are the lines that are most forward in the glider. So
what is your best glide speed on one of these things?
Depends on
best L over
so many
D is what we
factors.
call it,
yeah,
right?
It depends on so on a comp wing, which is not what you're looking at here, but when I'm racing on what's called a comp wing, so that's a very high aspect wing, so more susceptible to collapses, longer and skinnier, so faster through the air but less stable, then you can get up on full bar in perfectly still wind. You can fly about 70 kilometers an hour, but your trim speed is low 40s. So it's accelerating the glider considerably, but you're getting up there on a comp wing, you're getting close to kind of a medium range hang glider.
Interesting.
Which are the triangles where you're flying prone.
So you talked about a collapse.
Yep.
That sounds not cool.
Exciting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exciting. What is a collapse? What causes a collapse? And
collapse is usually violent air. It's not usually input. It's just, we're flying in invisible surroundings. We can't see the air moving unless there's smoke or pollution. If you're coming out of a thermal, so you've got pretty, at times, violent air going up really strongly, and right next to it, you've got the same, what goes up has to come down. And so that interface can be pretty dynamic. And so if you're not really what we call on it, you're not really paying attention or not noticing that, or sometimes you just fall out of a thermal, then you can have a collapse. And there are all kinds of different collapses. You can have frontals, you can have tucks, you can have asymmetric collapses. And we learn in training through maneuvers clinics and what's called SIV, again, French, situations en vol, to train this stuff, usually over water, where you've got an instructor that can help you, talk to you, a boat that can get you in case you have to throw your reserve or something. So you learn how to deal with collapses. They become, in the beginning, they're very nerve-wracking. They become a non-event. At this point, I don't care about having collapse. I know what to do. As you get better, too, you have much less collapses. When I'm racing now, I almost never have a collapse. It would be very unusual because they're always, your wings are talking to you. They're telling
you feel it
what's
coming
going
right
on.
before and you react
Exactly.
real quick, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talked about throwing a reserve. You carry a reserve chute?
Yes. When we race, usually two, just to have a backup in case the first one goes into your wing or something doesn't go well with it. But yeah, we carry a reserve, and reserves are phenomenally good at what they do. You very rarely hear of something too bad when somebody's thrown a reserve. What gets paragliders is getting all caught up in solving the problem too long, and they lose they forget about how close they were to the ground. They're not paying enough attention to that part, and they're paying more attention to that part.
So you
And
make
they
it
don't
sound like you throw your reserve and you're safe. So what does a landing
Mostly.
under a reserve
look like? It's kind of nerve-wracking because you don't have a lot of control, but the reserves these days, they used to just be rounds like you see that bring down the rocket parts and stuff, just round, called a Regalo reserve. And these days now they're square and they're steerable. So when you throw a reserve, that once it's deployed, the first thing you've got to do is get rid of your main wing and get that into your lap or pull it in, which can take some time. But then once it's in, then your reserve you've got toggles, just like your main wing does, and you can fly it. It doesn't have a very good glide. It's 3-to-1 as opposed to 10-to-1, but you can maybe get out of bad terrain to a place that's decent to land. But that all takes time, and you would need height to do all that. Often they're having the most exciting air is usually pretty close to the ground.
Right.
And that's where, if you get in trouble, you throw your reserve and you're on the deck pretty quick. And there's not much you can do except take the ride. And the ride can be pleasant or not so pleasant depending on the terrain that's underneath you.
Yeah, you mentioned, the coolest shots often come from when your wing's right next to a big rock.
Yes.
How much do you mess around with, I don't know, we call it mechanical lift or ridge lift or whatever, but like the lift that is mechanical versus thermal?
Yeah, you would not get very close to terrain when it's thermic, midday, strong air.
Because you got your thermals, so go take the ones that go higher.
If you take a collapse, there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas when it's mechanical lift, Torrey Pines, many of you maybe know that place down in San Diego. I've never actually flown there, but that's just sea breeze, and it's very constant. It's not gusty, it's not a dangerous wind, and you can get really tight on the terrain.
Predictable,
like
so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or early in the morning or late in the day when air is more gentle, then you can fly close to terrain safely. But terrain is terrain. And
Yeah.
that's where we get hurt. We don't get hurt at 10,000 feet. We get hurt when we're close to the terrain.
It's not the speed, it's the
Yeah.
stopping that hurts you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's one more spot
Gravity's
we wanted
tough.
to go to, right? And then I wanted to talk about how people get into this sport if they want to get into the sport. But we had this, the dunes. Where were they? And
Yeah, so this was during the sailing when I was sailing around the world, and we sailed.
So this was early.
This was early, yeah, and I wasn't much of a pilot then, but I was keen. But we'd sailed from Madagascar across the Mozambique Channel to the Bazarudo archipelago, an archipelago with 5 islands off the coast of Mozambique. And as we were sailing into there, it's a 20-mile sand island that's 400 feet high. There it is. And went, oh my goodness, we can fly that thing. It had never been flown, and we were there for a couple months in this part of the world and flew this thing as much as we could. But so this is a little clip from, this was shot in Madagascar, Mozambique, Cape Verdes, maybe a little bit in Scotland. But this was on our second trip, this sailing expedition. The expedition was all based around kite surfing, but I was pretty keen on paragliding.
You were getting into it, right?
We were doing a lot of flying.
This is what we think of when we, oftentimes people think of paragliding as.
Yeah, and you'll notice no helmet, no shoes, no reserve. This is the most safe, lovely, easy paragliding there is. Nothing like what you've been watching. This is mellow, but beautiful.
Expeditions aren't about 5-star hotels and pampered cruises. Expeditions are about hardship and difficulty, but when you get through it and find a place like we did in Mozambique, and you're the first to paraglide a spot that never has before, it makes it all worth it.
7 shooting stars in one night. The water and sand in our eyesight. The rocks in our hands.
When we set off to sail around the world, what we hoped to find were untouched coral gardens and lots of marine life and deserted beaches and deserted places. While that does exist, you do find that. What you also find a lot of, and more than you can possibly imagine, is trash and plastic and waste runoff and destroyed coral and seas that have been completely fished out. It's really sad. 12 years that we've been out here, we've also seen a big change from the beginning and the end. I can't imagine a world where these things no longer exist. We left the Indian Ocean and rounded Cape of Good Hope and the southern tip of Africa. We sailed 4,500 miles to here in Cape Verde, and we're just in search of wind and waves.
That sure is a cool way to see things. Sailboat
nice way
and
to see
paragliding,
things.
right?
Yeah. I have a funny story from the Mozambique dunes. So we, the first really big day that we had there, I had some friends that were there from Switzerland, and we had all those gliders in the sky. Huge tides, 18-foot tides in this part of the world, and really magnificent. And I didn't appreciate that there was an outside barrier reef that was protecting us when it was low tide. And so I brought everybody into the beach, took the dinghy back out and threw the anchor down, swam back into the beach, and we flew all day. And it was amazing. All that footage was that day. And as I'm flying back at the very end of the day, the wind's starting to die down, and I'm going, man, I don't see the dinghy. It should be out in the ocean, anchored. And then, oh no, it's on the beach. So in that whole day, the tide had come up 18 feet, and it was blowing pretty hard. And so big, big swells were coming all the way into the beach. It had ripped the dinghy off the anchor and come in through the shore break, which was about 12-foot shore break. And the dinghy's just completely full of sand. The engine's full of sand. And it was not possible to get going at that point. Luckily, we had a radio, so I could radio the boat and say, hey, we're out here and we're not getting back tonight. And so there was, 8 or 9 of us, and we slept in one of the tandem wings that night. We had no water, we had no food. And you can't believe how thirsty you get lying on a sandy beach in Mozambique.
I bet.
We were all just, there was a point where I thought, maybe I can suck some water out of this sand. and anyway, the next morning we were able to get most of the sand out, get the dinghy back down to the ocean. I was able to clean up the engine just enough to get it going, and we drove with everybody back to the main boat, and just as we got to the main boat, the engine blew up.
Whew.
So it was about a $10,000 mistake, but it was a really good day of paragliding, so it was worth it.
That must have been a nice engine on that boat. $10,000.
It was a nice brand new Yamaha outboard. It was an expensive mistake, but it was worth it.
So I hope you've inspired some people to consider paragliding. Does anybody want to go paragliding now?
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So
well, I can take you.
Let's talk about, you mentioned how you got into this. A girl that you met said, put on this parachute and go, and you're like, I got to do it now.
Sure.
But how does one in Southern California, now that the sport's more evolved and everything, how do you get into this? How do you learn how to do this?
You all actually live in one of the best places in the world to learn. There's one of the best and biggest schools is up in Santa Barbara called Eagle Paragliding. They have a great training hill. They're a great outfit. They do a really good job of teaching, and it's just north of Ventura. So you go to a school, just like you're learning with gliders. You go and you find an instructor that works for you, and you can get certified at the kind of the lowest level. It's called your novice rating, or P2, in about 2 weeks. And you spend quite a bit of time what's called ground handling, so not even flying at all. You just play with the wing in a little bit of wind and learn how it operates and how to move with the wing, because again, launching and landing are the two most dangerous things. And then you take it from there. And then by the end of the 2 weeks, you go up to Skyport, which is up at the top of the range above Santa Barbara, and fly from there to the beach, which is magnificent. We all chase our first flight the rest of our careers. The first time your feet leave the ground and you start flying is almost unrepeatable. It's very special, and so we kind of just keep chasing that feeling. And
then if you want to go 500 miles, but not go 500 miles.
Right. Well, then you have to be crazy.
How do you get into that? Because that's an interesting thing too. How do you transit for those of us that are backpackers or whatever? How do you go? So I've learned how to handle, and I can fly from the mountain to the beach.
I always think it's like the saying for a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what they're built for.
I like that.
You have to just do it. And so you go through the initial lessons, you do the 2-week course, and you get initial lessons, and then find people that are better than you and start flying with them and learn the basics. It's very easy to learn to fly a paraglider, super easy. It's very hard to fly them well. And so you take the time to take it seriously and train, just like you would for the PCT. You don't just start doing it necessarily. You're going to get fit as you do it.
That's how I did
nice.
My trail. I just started actually.
You can't just do it that way. Maybe that's the way to do it.
But you can't die. So the next part is like if you're hiking, you can't die walking.
Yes.
It's kind of hard to do. We all know how to walk.
Yes.
So you just don't walk as far, and then you walk further the next day.
Take care of your feet.
So what? Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part. But what does the risk profile of this sport look like? We talked about it a little bit earlier offline.
It's definitely not for everybody. Let's put it that way. There are a lot of people who fly their whole lives and never do much cross country. They're more than happy just flying off the top of the mountain and landing on the beach, and that's awesome. If it appeals to you and you like it and you like the unknown and you like the turbulence and that's something that you're going, wow, I'm into this, I'm exciting, then you can pursue it. And what's great about it is there's no end. There's no, People every day are doing things in this sport that blow my mind.
Do you feel like you're a risky person, that you take a lot of risks, or do you feel like pretty safe about?
I think my approach is very safe, but no, I think that I got into it very fast and luckily made cheap mistakes, and those are good. And sometimes, it's better lucky than good, right? So I think early on, we've all got to navigate risks, but early on, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so I'm sure a lot of it is luck, but a lot of it is mentors. A lot of it is taking the steps to listen to people who are better than you and being humble, because you've got to kind of get through that intermediate syndrome period that exists in all sports where, you think you're better than you are, which is a very dangerous place to be in aviation, not just paragliding, but in aviation.
Sure. It's one of these sports that, there's no room for error.
There's no
right.
room for
The
error.
error is death, right?
Exactly. The ground hurts. So, I luckily had people around me who were kind of hand on the shoulder, slow down, take more time. You need more time at this.
Don't be such an optimist.
Don't be
right?
such an optimist. And that was very timely, and he recognized it right away.
And then he's dragging you over to the mountain.
Yeah, then let's go fly over Mount Robson. But now I'm older, 52, I've done a bunch of these races. I have a 7-year-old. Things change that way too. But I am very glad I didn't get into the sport when I was 20. It was very timely for me to get into it when I was 35, when I was a little bit smarter.
So last question from me. What's your next line?
What's the next line?
Yeah, where's that aesthetic line?
I would love to do, keep this private, everybody. Where I ended the Alaska Traverse was at Mentasta Lake. So it's the literal end of the Alaska Range at the east end. And it's the very start of the rain gales. And the rain gales tie to the St. Elias that ties to Glacier Bay, Alaska. We dealt with a lot of bears. That part of the world is, I don't know that you could get through that many bears. There's so many bears in that part of the world, and it's way more glaciated and way icier, and I don't know it can be done. And the other hard thing is we are regulated. If it's national park or wilderness, we can fly over it, but we can't land or launch from it. So we're regulated like ultralight aircrafts. This is a wilderness rule back in the 60s that's ridiculous.
Crazy. I know that
It's
rule that you're
ridiculous.
talking
I mean,
about. That is ridiculous.
We're way less impact than mountain bikes, but it exists. And so when we flew across Denali, we got the permission from the Denali National Park to do that. But if we landed in it, they treated us like an emergency aircraft, and we had to walk out, which we did. We didn't make it across the Denali National Park. It was a 200K flight. So we landed, we both bombed out, and we walked out of it. But in this case, with the rain gales and Elias and Glacier, it's all national park, the whole thing. So we would need exceptional, the Forest Service would have to really work with us. Otherwise, you can't do it.
Or you just can't make a movie about it.
Or you don't make a movie.
I mean,
yeah, there's
if you're not
nobody in there
making a movie
regulating
about it,
it,
right? If you're not going to publicize
literally,
this stuff,
we're just landing on snow. We would
like
have
wherever
no
you're landing,
impact.
I don't think anybody can get to you, right?
No.
Like there's not going to be a ranger that's going to be like, I saw that guy land up there. Let me go get him.
There's no anything.
Yeah.
But I really don't know if it's possible. But I'd love to go try. But there's a lot of bears. Really a lot.
That is crazy. Yeah, and those are the bears that'll be like, I saw this giant thing fly out of the sky. I'm going to go see if I can eat it.
Yeah, they're big, hungry bears. So it would be. I have a funny bear story. Do we have any time?
Yeah.
So the film crew, when we did the Alaska expedition, was not always with us because they couldn't be. And so we were really, if you watch the whole movie, there were sections of it. We put in food caches in advance, but we were going so much slower than we planned that there were big sections of the trip where we were literally starving. And part of the style of the trip, people go, well, why didn't you just take some from the film crew? They weren't starving, but the style of the trip was it was self-supported. We put the food caches in and we're on our own. And so they could film us, but we couldn't get any, we didn't take an M&M off the film crew. And so at one stage, we were really suffering, and we hadn't had the film crew with us for a few days, and Dave and I were proper starving. And this one day we did about 12,000 feet of vertical, and this is with 60-pound packs, and we had tea. That was our food. And we were just hurting and not thinking well and not operating well. And we did 4 little flights that day, and we're slowly going west, and we finally get to the top of this mountain very late in the day. It was almost midnight, but it's summer in Alaska. It doesn't get dark. I mean, it gets dark for about 3 hours. And we get to the top of this peak, and we've got a flight, and we're going to fly across this river. And it's a big river, not deep, but a big one, and we're going to fly to the other side and camp. And he launches, and I'm struggling to get off because I'm just so calorie deficient, and I'm struggling to get off. And all of a sudden, I hear this, pow, 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 pow. And I look over, and Dave is just firing his gun. He had a 9mm or a Glock. I don't know anything about guns. He's got a pistol, and he's just firing it in the air. So he's lost his mind. And I start flying. I get off the ground. What is he doing? He's wasting precious bullets. And I'm flying behind him, and he's firing off his pistol, and I look down, and there's 2 bush planes on our side of the river below us. And bush planes mean people, 100%. You cannot leave a bush plane in Alaska because the grizzlies will eat the tires. They love the tires, and then they start ripping the canvas off, and they're just like gummy bears to bears. And so I'm radioing. I mean, Dave, turn back. That's food. There's people down there. They're a hunting camp or something. And he's firing off his pistol like a jerk off. And no, Sturt, come back. But we have to stay together. So we fly across the river and we land, and it's beautiful. And there's the wolves howling, but we're starving. And I'm, oh, Dave, didn't you see the planes? No, fire my gun. And so the next morning we wake up, sleep for a few hours, wake up, leave all our stuff, hike back across the river, and sure enough, it's a hunting camp, and they had just shot a black bear the day before. And so we go in, and we're clearly starving. And so one of the guides for these guys, it was some guys out of Kansas. They're huge people. And Kansas. And
corn-fed.
Yeah, exactly. And so and they're talking guns and stuff, and he puts out this thing of butter and pancakes and bear sausage, and I just grabbed the stick of butter, and I'm eating the whole stick of butter. And Dave's guns, and these guys are talking about guns, and I go, this is so awesome. And he's pulling out things of peanut butter, and I just, jam, and we're in heaven. So I'm just eating, and at one point, one of the big guys from Kansas looks down, and he goes, hey, what's that? And now I'm involved, so that's my bear spray. And because I'm not a gun guy. I hadn't have a gun. He had a gun, and they'd been talking caliber this and all this stuff. And that's my bear spray. And the guy goes, son, that is not bear spray. That there is pepper spray. The only thing that would do is keep Dave off you in the middle of the night. And I've been carrying pepper spray across Alaska. I was going to shoot a bet. You seen how pepper spray works? It goes psst. And a bear's charging, and you got to get a little closer, buddy, a little bit closer. Okay, now you're ready. So they gave me the proper bear spray, which then I hung on my thing. But apparently, even his gun, he had a 9mm or something. I think you got to hit a bear. You've got some in here. You got to hit a bear about 10 times with that. So I'm not sure we were that safe.
Or like right in the eye, both eyes.
Right in the eye, yeah. So don't take pepper spray to Alaska.
Or just stay up in the air, right? They
Or
can't get you up
stay in the
there.
air, yeah.
That's the only place they can't get you.
But when Dave left and everybody else left, I was in a particularly berry part of the Alaska range, and I'll tell you, I was nervous. It was a little nervous.
There's a lot up there.
There's a lot of
big ones.
A lot of big ones. Yeah.
At least you didn't have any food.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were kind of low.
They are the food.
We are the food. Yeah.
So we'd like to take a couple questions for the audience. So I'm sure there's a lot up there. Lance, you wanna
Grant, I'm going
pass
to
that mic
start
around?
off. We hear people climbing Everest and doing things. They cut the straps off their packs, cut their toothbrush in half. How critical is the weight that you carry with when you're paragliding? What are you doing, and how sensitive is that?
It's pretty critical. You have to you fly a wing with a particular weight range, and so in this case, both Dave and I were quite a bit over the top, which makes your wing very talkative, not as nice to fly, not quite as safe, but it's all a trade-off, right? You would have had to carry a bigger wing to carry more food. So it is a factor. When you're racing, it's a huge factor. In this case, we did all the cutting the straps. We trimmed down as best we could. But we knew that there were going to be, we stayed, before the Denali part, we stayed camped there in the snow for 8 days. And so, just because the conditions were terrible, and we knew that going in, that we were going to have times like that, so we carried more than we probably needed, but then, of course, we kept running out of food.
Question.
When you're parasailing, how do you detect a thermal?
Great question. So, when birds are flying, so we can use all kinds of visuals like that. Birds turning, smoke. In some places in the world, you can see thermals where you've got really loose dirt because it'll pick it up and bring it up into the sky. Small birds, insects, these are visuals. But as you learn and get better at it, thermals trigger off objects, top of mountains, tractor going through the field. So difference between a green field and a brown field. So there's places that we can go hunting for thermals and have a good chance of finding them if you're in unstable air. So, but most of the time you can't see them. But you can feel it really well. As you're flying through the sky, we call it finding seams and lines that, okay, this line is a little bit better than that one was. I'm going to follow this. And very often it's going to take you into a thermal. And we have instruments that tell us how strong the thermal is. So as you get better and better, you get better at mapping a thermal really fast, because when you're thermaling, half the time you're going the wrong way. You're going like this, and you're trying to go that way. And so the less time you spend climbing, the more distance you're going to travel. So as you get better at it, then, there's a thermal, I'm very quickly into the best part of it, and I can stay in the best part of it as you go up. And that's your instruments and how you're looking at the sky and the horizon. And so, but these are things that take time to learn. Yeah.
So if I'm Rich right now, I'm kind of imagining that Rich is thinking about how do I explain this to the wife?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Question is, after a great day, do you dream like this? Because I had an experience snorkeling.
Yeah.
And I would then at night dream that stuff. And so I imagine it's not like the days where you just ass exhausted and you just like pass out and you're like comatose, but after a great day, just like, do you dream of that?
1,000,000%. We actually have a term for it. It's called the alien world. When after a really long flight, your brain uses a lot more calories than you do physically. And so, after a really long flight, we eat in the air, we pee in the air, but, and you have to do a very good job of staying hydrated, or you find yourself on the ground, you make a mistake. So it's very important to keep yourself nourished and hydrated, but you can never do enough. And when you're, just imagine flying in a jet that's really turbulent for 10 hours. It's pretty unsettling. There's just a lot of movement going on. And so usually at the end of the day, things get really nice and the air mellows out, and you can often go for these very long glides. But when you feel fine, and then your feet touch the ground, and it's a crazy out-of-body experience where, your legs don't work that well because they've been like this all day. And so it's kind of hard to stand up, and you just feel like scuba or surfing or something that's really upset your central nervous system for 10 hours. Your balance is super funky. If any of you have done any long distance sailing, it feels really weird to get in the shower after a 20-day passage. You're just land sick. And it's like that with paragliding. It feels great. It's this great alien world, but it's very disorienting. And then those nights, your dreams are extra special.
Do you find that, because at the end of this, you have to land, and landing is kind of a lot of feet involved.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of jogging along the ground.
Oh, there's.
Do you find that
usually
you
those
did a
days
lot
you
because
just
like
whack?
yeah, like you're like I'm going to jog it out, and then like you take 2 steps and it's just face plant.
Those big days, it's pretty rare to be able to run it out. You don't realize it, but often after a while you learn about this, and so before you land, you start doing this in the air, get your feet out of your harness and try to get things going again. But usually you just face plant. That's it.
Yeah, I'm going to throw 2 at you, so together, and you can
sure
answer as you wish. Do you ever think of Isaac?
Do I ever think of what?
Well, you had one of your companions surname was Greece.
Yes.
So, do you ever think of Isaac, the guy that tried to stick wings?
Oh yeah,
Greek mythology.
Sure. Icarus. Icarus.
Oh, Icarus. Okay.
When you're at 18,000.
Yes. Yes.
Right, Icarus. Sorry. And the other one is, what other things are flying up there that are you ever concerned about bumping into another aircraft or another bird or another whatever?
Yeah, that's both good questions. I've never thought of Icarus, but I will now. That's a great thing to think about. Don't get too close, but great question. That's a lot of fun to even think about, but no, I hadn't. But we do worry about other aircraft, for sure. Sailplanes being the one, there have been mid-airs with sailplanes in paragliding, and typically it's not good for either pilot. Let's put it that way. These days we have instruments that have what's called FLARM, where commercial aircraft, gliders, we can see each other in the air. And so that's solved a lot of the mid-air problems. But you have a place very close here, it's called Marshall over in San Bernardino, where big jets come over the San Gabriels and those mountains to come into LA and Ontario. And we very often are very close to those planes. And it's terrifying because they don't see us. We're slow and tiny, and we're often, you can kind of see in some of these videos, if we're this to you, we're almost invisible. If we're banked, you can see us pretty well, but if we're on the same height and flying this way and they're flying that way, they don't see us very much. The really scary ones for me personally, out where I live in Idaho, we have a Air Force base quite close there in Mountain Home. So we have F-18s doing training out in the mountains that we fly in, and you hear them. Often you don't even see them, and they're usually below us. They're doing barrel rolls down in the canyons and stuff. And I know some of those guys. I have a very good friend whose brother's an F-18 pilot, and he says most of the time they're not even looking out the window. So they would never see us. We would just be a bug on their windscreen and it'd be over. But, there's nothing we could do.
It's not a bad way to go.
No, it'd be pretty quick.
Of all the ways to go, like you're doing what you love and
pretty quick. Yeah, it's over. It's over. But it is
How
concerning.
did Rich die? He got hit by an F-18. Wait.
Wait, what? Yeah. This is a story.
I'm okay with that one.
This is for the Adventurers Club.
Yeah, like that's an acceptable way to end my life, in my opinion.
Yeah, you mentioned something about shade in your talk, and I was wondering how that affects your flight.
Yeah, so we could just have too much cloud. We like cloud because clouds are marking lift, but you can have, when the atmosphere is too unstable, or you've got a cold front coming in, something that we need sun. That's where our energy is coming from. That's what's creating the thermals. So if you've got a lot of stratus, a ton of cirrus can be really bad. Smog, smoke. There's a lot of things that just shut the atmosphere down. So very often, like where I fly in Idaho and the Rockies, early in the day, we call it it's called CAPE, but it's convective available potential energy in the atmosphere. And if there's too much moisture, too much heat, and that starts turning into clouds, those clouds can grow really big, really fast. You've all seen thunderstorms. that stuff's dangerous for us, but sometimes we can start on days like that in the mountains and run for the flats. Usually that overdevelopment will stay pinned more in terrain, and we can run out to the flats, but as the sun marches around the sky, it gets behind all that overdevelopment. We could be pretty safe. We're out a long ways from it, but we run out of sun. So that'll just kill parts of the day. So you need the energy, but not too much energy. It's very fickle.
Hey, Gavin, absolutely fascinating talk. Thank you. I have a million questions, but I guess first of all, I'd like to thank you on the correct pronunciation of hurricane.
Utah.
Yeah, I do.
That took me a while. That was like Boise.
God's country.
I live in Idaho, but usually everybody says Boise. But yeah, go ahead.
And I was just curious about your mention of the Iditarod of flying, and I thought you could expand on that.
Well, I did that also for Phoebe. She's big into sled dogs, but I think it's just that was specifically about the Red Bull X Alps. It's a vicious race. It's a crazy endurance race, and it has this. What I love about the X Alps is it has this whole flying risk factor. A lot of the kind of 100-milers or really brutal endurance events are just put your head down and do it. Whereas this one has this whole strategy thinking, very high risk aspect of it. And the best pilot, you could put Kilian Jornet in that race and he'd get slaughtered. So you got to move really good on the ground and you got to be really fit, but the best pilot wins every time. The same guy has won the last 8 races. His name's Kriegel Maurer. He's the Kelly Slater of our sport. No non-Swiss has ever won this race. So his first was in 2009. The race started in 2003, but he's won the last 8.
Probably helps home turf, right?
It's home turf. That helps a lot, but he's just a wicked pilot.
Yeah.
And he's amazing. So the best pilot wins. He's not the fastest on the ground.
Well, I mean, of course, like if you're in the air, you're going to beat
him.
Everybody on the ground.
Yeah, and he's just making little moves all the time. They're just a little bit better in the air than everybody else. And yeah, it's fun to watch.
Well, thanks, Gavin, for joining us tonight. Thank you all for joining us. It's been great. I hope everybody's inspired. I definitely am.
Awesome.
So if you're joining us online, make sure to stop by the Adventures Club sometime. We do this every week. But that's all we have for tonight. So thank you again.